The warm, damp air of the glass greenhouse pressed against my face like a heavy velvet blanket. I was only a poor groundskeeper pulling weeds on her family's massive estate. Elena was the daughter of my billionaire boss. Her father could destroy my entire life with a single phone call. I knew the danger of looking at her, but she was standing right in front of me. She had climbed down the narrow stone path to find me. The scent of sweet jasmine and damp soil filled the glass dome. The only sound was the soft rustling of her linen summer dress as she moved. The temperature inside was 20 degrees warmer than the freezing winter air outside. A tiny pulse jumped in the delicate hollow of her neck. Elena was 21 years old. She wore a delicate pastel pink linen summer dress that caught the bright sunlight. I looked at her from behind a large potted palm tree. I tried to focus on my rusty pruning shears. My hands were cold and dirty from the wet soil, but my heart was beating a rapid rhythm. She took 3 slow steps toward me. Her large forest green eyes locked onto mine. Her pupils dilated in the bright morning light. I felt a sudden wave of heat rise in my cheeks. I took a step back. I pressed my hand against the cold, damp glass wall. I had to remember my place. I was a hired hand. She reached out her hand. Her fingers were burning hot against my cold wrist. The sudden touch sent a jolt of electric heat straight to my chest. My breath caught in my throat. I looked down at her small fingers on my arm. She leaned in closer. Our shoulders were almost touching. Her lips were parted. She whispered to kiss her anyway. She begged me to ignore the rules of the house. She said she did not care about the business merger her father planned. She asked me to hold her. The physical tension in the warm glass room was suffocating. I wanted to run away to protect us, but her touch was a heavy anchor. I took a deep breath. I stepped back to create a safe boundary between us. I told her that her father would fire me instantly if we were seen. I said my family needed my wages to survive the winter. Elena did not retreat. She took another step forward. She closed the distance between our bodies to only 3 inches. She looked up at me with a desperate, wild longing in her eyes. She reached up and placed both of her hands on my chest. I felt her rapid heartbeat under my palms. She tilted her head back. She told me she was tired of being a pawn. She asked me to hold her. The winter sleet began to tap softly against the glass panes of the conservatory dome. The sound was a rhythmic, steady whisper that isolated us from the rest of the world. The cold white frost covered the edges of the high glass roof. Inside our small corner, the air was warm and heavy. We were surrounded by tall green ferns and bright hanging orchids. The temperature was thick with the scent of damped soil and blooming jasmine. The only light was the soft, bright morning sun filtering through the misty glass. We stood in the narrow gap between 2 stone plant tables. The space was less than 2 feet wide. The air was charged with an electric silence. She whispered that she could not go back to that house. Her voice was a low, breathless murmur that vibrated through the quiet space. I could see the soft rise and fall of her chest under the pink linen dress. A tiny twitch appeared in her left cheekbone. Her green eyes were wide with a silent, pleading panic. I took a slow step back to keep the distance. My shoulder brushed against the rough leaves of a palm tree. The scratch of the foliage was cold against my bare skin. But Elena did not let me retreat. She stepped closer. Our bodies were almost touching. I could feel the radiating warmth of her skin. It was a sharp contrast to the freezing draft under the glass door. She reached out and touched my hand. The warmth of her palm made my fingers twitch. I slowly pulled my hand back and tucked it into my pocket to maintain my guard. I kept my hands flat on my thighs to stop them from trembling. I watched her lips part slightly. Her pupils dilated as she looked at my mouth. The proximity made my chest tighten with a sudden suffocating heat. I knew we were playing with fire. If the head groundskeeper walked down this path, my career would be ruined. My family would lose their small cottage on the estate. But my mind was entirely focused on the golden flecks in her green eyes. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to pull her close. I took a deep, shaky breath. I told her she had to return to the main house. I said her father was hosting his business partners. Elena did not move away. She took another step closer, her chest almost touching mine. She whispered that the house was a hollow, silent cage. She said she felt completely lonely inside those massive rooms. The vulnerability in her low voice broke my remaining strength. My heart pounded against my ribs. We stood frozen in the small, warm space. The world outside the glass walls was gone. We were trapped in our own private sanctuary of green leaves and quiet breaths. The sun rose higher, casting bright, high-exposure light through the glass dome. The white marble floorboards of the greenhouse path reflected the glowing warmth. I picked up my pruning shears with a quiet, metallic clink. My hands were shaking. I tried to focus on her father's prized orchids. My knuckles were dry and burning from the cold dirt. Elena sat down on a low stone bench near the back wall. She did not look at me. She kept her eyes on her lap. I saw the sad expression in her forest green eyes. I stood by the wooden table, my head low. I told her I had to finish cleaning the main aisle before her mother arrived. I said her family expected absolute perfection from the ground staff. But Elena did not let me pass. She reached out and gently caught my wrist. Her warm fingertips sent an electric shock straight through my skin. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. I stood frozen beside her on the stone path. She did not pull her hand away. The touch of her warm hand was a shocking contrast to my cold skin. I looked down at her fingers, then slowly pulled my arm back to restore the distance. I told her she must not touch me. I said the head secretary Clara was always watching. Clara had scolded me for my messy work earlier that morning. She had threatened to cut my meager wages. I felt a sudden hot flush of shame rise in my chest. Elena looked up at me. She adjusted the strap of her pink linen dress. A small, tired twitch appeared in the corner of her right eye. She told me she was tired of the expectations. She admitted that she had spent her life trying to please her demanding father. She said she felt completely hollow inside. The non-romantic truth hung in the air. It was a confession of her own deep exhaustion. She felt like an asset, not a person. I felt a sudden deep ache in my chest. I wanted to comfort her. I wanted to protect her from the coldness of her world. But I knew the boundary was still there. I took a slow step back, pressing my back against the glass wall. She pulled her hands to her chest. She looked up at me with absolute vulnerability. Her green eyes were swimming with unshed tears. The heavy silence was a physical weight. I confessed that my father was sick. I said my wages were the only thing keeping my family warm this winter. The truth made us equals in our suffering. We were closer than we had ever been. The afternoon heat inside the greenhouse was growing intense. The glass walls trapped the bright, warm spring sunlight. I was standing near the tall hibiscus plants. The soft rustle of the leaves was a peaceful rhythm in the quiet room. Elena stood directly in front of me. The distance between us was less than 3 inches. I could feel the radiating warmth of her skin against my chest. My breathing became rapid. I looked up at her face. Her chestnut hair was loose. I saw a small twitch in her upper lip. Her intense green eyes were locked on my face. She reached out. Her hand hovered over my cheek. Her fingers gently brushed a stray lock of my hair behind his ear. The touch was electric. I closed my eyes, leaning into the warmth of her hand for one brief, forbidden second. I felt her other hand slide gently around my waist, pulling me closer. The touch was incredibly soft. Our chests were almost touching. I could hear the rapid, frantic beat of her heart against my palm. I leaned down, my lips pausing just a hair's breadth from hers. I could feel the warm steam of my breath on her mouth. The anticipation was an agonizing, sweet torture. I wanted to kiss her. I wanted to forget my name, my poverty, and the world outside. We were suspended in a perfect, quiet vacuum. I felt my hand rise. My fingers were almost touching the soft fabric of her pink linen dress. The physical tension was a suffocating weight in the quiet room. My lips hovered a millimeter from her warm lips. I could smell the sweet jasmine on her collar. The warmth was a perfect sanctuary. We were two bodies finding heat in the dark. I wanted to pull her close, but the fear of ruin made me hesitate. I held my breath, caught between desire and duty. Suddenly, the sharp sound of heels clicking on the concrete path outside broke the silence. A loud voice called out her name from the entrance. It was her father's secretary. Clara was looking for her. The spell was instantly broken. Elena flinched, her hand dropping from my waist. I pulled back quickly, my heart hammering against my ribs. I picked up my heavy iron pruning shears with shaking hands. I took a step toward the glass window, hiding my pained face in the cold shadow. We were both breathing heavily in the quiet room. The heavy boundary was back. We had almost crossed the line, but the cold reality was waiting outside the door. Clara's footsteps grew louder. Elena turned and walked toward the entrance. I was left alone in the shadows of the palms. The final week of the spring season arrived with a soft, steady rain against the glass roof. The greenhouse was quiet, but the air inside was thick with a tense, suffocating pressure. I was packing my iron gardening tools into my heavy wooden box. I was preparing to leave the estate for the last time. My winter contract had ended. I had no reason to return to her family's mansion. Elena stood by the tall glass partition. She was staring out at the gray rain falling on the lawn. Her jaw was clenched so tightly a small pulse was jumping in her neck. Suddenly, she turned around. She walked directly to me with rapid, desperate strides. I took a step back, my hands trembling. I reached for my wooden box to maintain the boundary, but Elena did not let me leave. She grabbed my hand with an intense, unyielding grip. Her hot palm sent a sudden electric jolt straight to my heart. My breath caught in my throat. I looked down at her hand on my arm. The contrast between her expensive pink linen dress and my cheap, rough oatmeal sweater was sharp. She leaned in close, her chest almost touching mine. She whispered to please not leave her. The billionaire's daughter was gone. She was begging me to stay. She told me she did not care about her family's corporate mergers. She said the massive mansion felt like an empty golden cage. She whispered that her life meant nothing without me. She looked directly into my eyes, her fingers trembling against my skin. The emotional dam had shattered. The truth was out in the open. It was a beautiful, terrifying confession that could never be taken back. Tears finally spilled over her long lashes. They fell onto my hand, feeling hot against my cold skin. I told her I loved her. I said I had loved her in silence since the first day she walked into the greenhouse. The confession broke the final barrier between us. I let out a ragged, trembling breath. I pulled her flush against my chest, wrapping my arms securely around my waist. I buried my face in her shoulder. The risk of ruin was absolute, but in her arms, the fear did not matter anymore. We were together. We stood in the middle of the warm glass room, holding each other tightly. The rain outside continued to fall, but we did not feel the chill. The scent of sweet jasmine filled the air as I pressed my lips to her forehead. I took a slow step back to look at her face, but she pulled me close again. The immediate relief of our confession was a sweet, intense wave. We stood in the center of the massive, quiet greenhouse, holding each other as if we would never let go. The rain continued to fall outside, but the warmth inside our small dome was a perfect sanctuary. Her father's empty mansion sat in the distance, but his rules did not matter anymore. We had broken the boundaries of his empire. Elena sat on the edge of a low stone bench. I stood between her knees, my arm wrapped securely around my waist. The physical heat between us was a raging fire in the cold afternoon. I reached out, my hand gently cupping her cheek. Her skin was warm and soft against my rough, calloused fingers. She leaned her head into my palm, her eyelids fluttering closed. I felt a sweet, intense relief wash over my body. We had crossed the line, and there was no going back. She told me she had already packed her bags. She said she was ready to leave the estate forever. She whispered that we would go somewhere quiet. Her low, gravelly voice was a beautiful promise that made my heart leap. She said we would leave the city behind and build a simple life where no one knew her name. I looked into her forest-green eyes, seeing her absolute trust in me. The fear of our uncertain future dissolved. I told her I would follow her anywhere. I said I would protect her from the coldness of the world. We were poor in plans, but rich in devotion. We were ready to face the consequences together. I pulled back slightly to check the entrance of the greenhouse. I had to ensure we were safe. Elena pulled me down beside her, wrapping her arms tightly around my neck. I buried my face in her chestnut hair, smelling the sweet scent of jasmine. We shared the warmth in our small glass sanctuary, ignoring the dark clouds outside. The mansion in the distance looked powerless now. We had escaped the golden cage of her father's wealth. We were no longer living on borrowed time. Every second of this night was ours to keep. I rested my head against hers, listening to the steady, powerful thumping of her heart. We had found our home in each other. There was no more push and pull. We were ready to step out of the shadows. I looked down at her hands in mine. The cold gold ring she usually wore was gone. She had left it on the stone bench. We were officially unbound. 6 months had passed since the night we fled from her father's massive estate. We lived in a tiny, quiet wooden cabin near the high mountains. The setting was simple. Outside, a soft spring rain pattered against the tin roof, creating a peaceful, steady rhythm. Inside, the rustic iron stove crackled softly, filling the single room with a cozy, dry warmth. I sat on a worn wooden chair by the window, watching the green leaves of the oak trees sway in the gentle breeze. I had found work as a driver for a local lumber mill. The work was hard, and my hands were rougher than before, but the modest wages I earned belonged entirely to us. Her father had tried to find us for the first few weeks, but his search had finally ceased. They had given up their pursuit. We were completely forgotten by the high society world. Elena was finally free. Elena walked into the warm cabin, her rich chestnut hair slightly damped from the soft rain. She smiled a real, radiant smile that reached her forest-green eyes. She sat down on my lap, reducing the distance between us to nothing. She pulled a simple wool blanket over our shoulders, sharing the warmth of our small sanctuary. She reached out. Her hand gently cupped my cheek. Her fingers were warm and soft against my skin. I looked into her eyes. There was no fear, no guilt, and no secrets left between us. I leaned in, my lips meeting hers in a deep, sweet, and incredibly slow kiss. It was a kiss of absolute peace. It was the final, perfect destination of the long, dark road we had traveled. I closed my eyes, feeling her strong arms wrap securely around my waist. The memory of the past slid away into the soft spring rain. I looked at her, my heart filled with gratitude. Our love had survived the storm. Thank you for listening to our slow burn story of forbidden love. If you felt the intense tension of our journey, please subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment with your favorite moment from our stolen nights. Your support keeps these stories alive. If you loved this, you will adore our next video about a quiet painter who falls for his wealthy patron's daughter. It is another beautiful, heart-wrenching story of forbidden desire and high stakes. Until next time, remember that some boundaries are meant to be broken. Let the rain wash the world away. Find your own sanctuary in the dark. We will see you very soon in our next slow burn story. Keep listening to our quiet hearts and stay safe. The warm, damp air of the glass greenhouse pressed against my face like a heavy velvet blanket.